Hello, and welcome to a little happiness lecture. I want to thank Nancy Berg and Emily Salee of the Montana Safe Schools Center. That would be the University of Montana Safe Schools Center. My name is John Sommers-Flanagan. I am a professor of counseling at the University of Montana, and I am delighted and honored to be able to offer this short educational experience that focuses on happiness. Whoops, you've now seen the final conclusions at the beginning, and so I'm just showing you all my tech skills here at once. This particular talk is called Intro to Positive Psychology and Happiness, or as Aristotle liked to say, eudaimonia. So here we go. Again, thanks to Emily, Nancy, the UM Center for Safe Schools. Thanks also to the Montana Happiness Project team, some of whom you can see on this slide. I have 3 learning objectives, and I'm going to try to accomplish them all. I'm aware of the fact that my objectives may not be the same as your objectives. I hope whatever yours are, that you can experience them. Mine are for me to describe with you the history of and the need for positive psychology and positive psychology interventions, or as we call them, PPIs, or sometimes we call them evidence-based happiness practices. And these are designed to pursue happiness and well-being. Second objective is to list at least 3 evidence-based positive psychology interventions, or PPIs. And the third is to apply evidence-based PPIs to your personal and professional context. For most of you, the professional context will probably involve schools. Very quickly, a flashback. What is the pursuit of happiness? Well, it turns out the pursuit of happiness in the Declaration of Independence really kind of traces back to John Locke, which traces back probably to Aristotle. Although a lot of people disagree on exactly what Aristotle, the Greek philosopher, said about happiness. Here are some of the things that I think are mostly true about what Aristotle would think of happiness. The first thing is he'd probably say it's not an emotion. It's not a feeling. It's not material wealth. It's not political achievement or maybe any kind of achievement. It's really not so much an outcome as it is a process of fulfilling your or my virtuous potentials in the context of community, right? So it's not just about me, and I'll mention that a little later as I talk about how to pursue eudaimonic happiness, which is what Aristotle, I think, was describing. In addition, happiness is not this. It is not this. You'll notice, and I include this particular slide because I know this is about happiness, and I know sometimes people will think, oh, he's going to push a little toxic positivity on us all. I want to say, no, I'm not. In fact, I'm going to start here by showing you this slide, which I completely hate and I think is ridiculous. Like this very attractive young woman here in the top left-hand corner. Are you happy or sad? What a ridiculous question, as if binaries are ever really very good. It's certainly not true that we would categorize ourselves as happy or sad. There's so much more to our emotional lives than just that. Here's another one just below her. It says, no one can make you happy until you're happy with yourself first. That is so completely ridiculous that you can see no one would claim it, so they had to put anonymous there. That's not true. It's just not true. It's just words. You could say it the backwards way or in reverse order if you wanted to. It would make as much sense. The one that really pushes my buttons is this one here, and I don't know if you can see my cursor, but I'm pointing at the one that says, nothing is worth it if you aren't happy. Well, not true. I'll give you a personal example. My dad died a couple of years ago, and the last 4 or 5 years of his life, he was stuck in bed. He'd been a very active man throughout his life. He loved sports and anything that involved movement and activity. But he was stuck in bed, and it was hard. I would go to see him as much as I could. He lived in the Portland area. Um, and the visits were fine, and they got worse because his cognitive functioning started to get worse toward the end too. But he was just physically miserable. Um, and yet, and these were not smiley, happy times. I would go visit him, and we would have pretty good times, but it was not what I would call happy. But for me, I would not trade those times with him for any smiley, happy, party, pleasure time because being with him was for me in that time the most important thing I could do. And to spend as much time as I could with him meant something to me. It didn't mean happy, smiley times. It did mean feeling good about how I was spending my time with him. And I know you all probably have had similar experiences. We know that oftentimes the most meaningful happiness comes from being with people we love through hard times. Not necessarily through all happy, fun times, but through hard times. I'm sure you can think of examples for yourself. Really, the best definition, and this is based on Aristotle's idea and others' ideas, and it is that intersection or the connection, the place where your flowering of your greatest and unique virtues, gifts, skills, and talents intersect over time, right? And across different situations with the needs of the world or the needs of your family or the needs of your community, or in your case, oftentimes the needs of your school or the needs of your students in your classrooms. That this is the definition of happiness. It's our own talents and skills and finding that sweet spot where they intersect with our role and our context in the world. I think that's a great definition. And I want you to start thinking as I'm talking right now about how this applies to you. And, how do you match your gifts, your special talents with the needs of your friends and your family and your communities and the world and your school? So, one quick anecdote from my own life. I was in full-time private practice as a psychologist for a number of years, and I saw a lot of young people. I remember one boy, he was 11, and I saw him for maybe, half a year or so. And then I quit seeing him. And then maybe he was 16 or 17, and I'm riding my bike up a hill to get to my house, and I hear somebody coming behind me just breathing really hard, and he's yelling, "Dr. John, Dr. John." And I slow down, and he catches me, and he says, "Hey, remember me?" And I say, "Yeah, I remember you. How are you doing?" And we talked a little bit. And then I asked him, "What do you remember about our time together in counseling?" And he says, "I remember that one time you blew up a bunch of balloons, and then we walked around the office and we stepped on them and popped them." And that never happened. I hate balloons, first of all, and I hate blowing up balloons. And I really hate the sound of popping balloons. And so I know there was no way I ever did that with this kid when he was 11. And so I said, "Yeah, okay, well, what else do you remember?" And he looked at me and he said, I don't remember hardly anything." And then he paused and said, "But I do remember that it felt good to be there with you and we had a good time together." And I feel emotional even when I talk about that because for me that was my sweet spot when I was doing counseling or psychotherapy with young people. The sweet spot was to have them have a positive emotional experience with me where hopefully they also learned some things. It wasn't just to have fun together, but it was about connecting. It was about positive emotions. And so it was really nice for me to hear that story from him. I want you to think about yourselves now. And this is something you obviously, we're at a distance. We're not even in real time. And so do this as you can. Think of a nice story of yourself and the manifestation of you and your unique strengths, your gifts, your skills, your talents, your virtues. Think about how they come out in your interactions with others. Now, that might be with your family, it might be with your students at school, it might be with your peers or your colleagues at work. Think about how they perceive you and what they value about you. And I know it can feel awkward to focus on the positive, but I got to tell you, one thing that we know from positive psychology is that lingering on your strengths, letting yourself notice them, letting yourself use them, your positive qualities, doing that will serve you way better than getting too focused and preoccupied by your flaws. And I want to say that because it's so easy for us to over focus and get preoccupied on our flaws, on what's wrong with us. And so, to the extent that you can, I hope you can reflect on those positive qualities you have and how they're reflected back to you by how others experience you. So why do we push this thing, this eudaimonic or eudaimonic happiness? Well, in the beginning, psychology spent 100 years really focusing and studying the question of what's wrong with you. And I'm pointing at you. I could just as well be pointing at me, but what's wrong with you is a question that I think resonates with all of us. I think it's a very common question that we can get over focused on. And so did psychology. For 100 years, most of the studies were on psychopathology and mental disorders and anxiety and depression and suicide and OCD and ADHD and ODD and PTSD and bipolar and you name it. We're good at naming it. Freud, in his eternal wisdom, used to say that the goal of psychotherapy is to move people from neurotic misery to common unhappiness. Well, now there's a goal for you. He may not have been the most optimistic person on the planet. And really, oftentimes when we go for counseling or psychotherapy, the thing that happens is we actually become more aware of our problems. We're given some tools to try to deal with them. And oftentimes it can be frustrating because oftentimes the problems don't shrink. And we try to fix them or we try to shrink them and they don't shrink because they're very persistent. That's the way human problems are. They're very persistent. They don't like to go away. So one of the things we try to do in positive psychology and in uh, evidence-based eudaimonia is to focus on developing our strengths and focusing on our strengths and growing our resources so that we can use our skills and our strengths and our resources in order to cope with those persistent and troubling problems that probably are coming along with us from our past into our present and into our future. And so what we try to do is we try to grow the positives about ourselves in order to deal with the problems that we all have. So I'm going to go over maybe 4 evidence-based eudaimonic approaches. 3 good things: gratitude practice, savoring, grounding, calming, and sleeping. So here we go. Tool number 1, 3 good things. If we were all together, I would say, I'm going to take a survey. How many of you, when you lie down to go to bed, you go through a highlight reel of all the nice things that happened that day? Often, not many people raise their hands because more likely, what's more natural, and really probably all natural, is that when our head hits the pillow, we start to think about our regrets. We start to think about what might have gone wrong or what we wish we had done differently during that day. Or alternatively, we start to think about the things that we're dreading or worrying about for tomorrow. And so we ruminate on the past, what we might have done differently, or the future, what is coming up, and that gives us some worries or anxieties. Why do we do that? Well, Charlie Brown articulates it, maybe not perfectly, but he says, sometimes I lie awake at night and I ask, where have I gone wrong? Then a voice says to me, this is going to take more than one night. I think that's not uncommon for us to experience. It seems to be, and there are different explanations for it, but nobody knows for sure. Maybe it has to do with evolutionary psychology. It seems to be the way most of our brains are built. That when we relax and we try to turn off our thoughts, we often think are negative, depressive, or anxiety provoking thoughts. Now, if we were in person, I'd get a volunteer right now and I would have you do three good things with me right now. Three good things is a signature technique developed by a guy named Martin Seligman. He probably stole it from some of the practices that happened for centuries in monasteries. The way it works is before you go to sleep, or right now, as I'm talking and you're listening, write down or think about, put it in the front of your brain, three good things that happened during the day or the last 24 hours. And if you don't like the word good, you don't have to use the word good. You could say three blessings if you're more oriented that direction, or you could say, three not bad things. Or maybe three, and this might fit even better for Aristotle's eudaimonic happiness, maybe three meaningful things, maybe three things that mattered to you that you did or that happened so far today or yesterday. And then the next part of this is really important. And I'm not sure that the monks in the monasteries were doing this, but Seligman told us to ask ourselves, why? Why did those good things happen? Seligman likes to brag and say, well, whenever I give people this assignment after a week, they just want to keep doing it. And I'd say, well, yeah, maybe. That's possible. Um, I think personally, my impression of this particular technique still, and maybe more so before, was that this is kind of hokey. It's kind of a hokey thing to lay down and think three good things and then to try to think about why those things happened. But let me just share before I go to the next slide, which I gave you a preview of there for a moment. So my experience with this is I tried doing it. I actually go to sleep pretty quickly, so it didn't seem to really even make any difference for me. But I also often will awaken in the middle of the night at 2 in the morning or 4 in the morning. And at that time, when I wake up and I'm all by myself with my thoughts turn dark and unpleasant. And I'll start thinking terrible things. I mean, really bad things about myself, about the world, about the future, and maybe how I've ruined things for people or myself or the world, and I'm a terrible person, and all those thoughts that are, and most of us, when we're in bed, even if there's someone next to us, we're still alone with our thoughts and they still feel a little out of control. So what I started to do is in the middle of the night when I woke up, I said to myself, I'm going to do three good things. And it hasn't been perfect, but what I got to say is doing an intentional three good things practice when I wake up at 2 or 4 in the morning, way better than just really feeling pummeled by my own negative thoughts. Sometimes I can't get the good things to stick in my head, but still I'm giving it a try. And oftentimes I'll ask myself why. And when I ask myself why, I kind of trickle down to values. It's like, well, why did the good thing happen? Well, it had to do with me having a particular value of wanting to help somebody or wanting to do something good in the world or wanting to just be responsible or whatever the value was. And then I actually do feel a little bit good about that. So as much as I've made fun of this technique, I find for myself the unique practice of doing it in the middle of the night is a good thing for me. I really recommend, try it out. Try it out when you go to bed, try it out in the middle of the night, try it out first thing in the morning, try it out whenever it seems to work best in your unique life situation. Okay, so the second tool is savoring. And what is savoring? Savoring is the deliberate effort to extend and expand positive experiences. So what that means is, let's say you walk up a hill or a mountain and you get outside and you're breathing in the cool, fresh, nice air. Savoring would say, let's let ourselves experience the positivity of that just a little bit longer. It's easy to think of this when you think about chocolate or if you like wine or if you like cheese, if you have a particular food or drink that you really love. It's easy to think about, oh, that's what savoring is. But psychologically, savoring is to extend our other, maybe our meaningful experiences. Let's say you get an award for you to be able to just sort of let yourself feel good about it for a little while. Let's say a friend of yours gives you a compliment. Let's say somebody holds a door open for you. Let's say that you just happen to find time to call a friend. Savor those moments. Let them last a little bit longer. The research is pretty interesting. It improves mood. It also increases satisfaction. You can do this with your fun experiences. You can do this with your meaningful experiences. You can do this with an outside kind of exercise experience. What we usually do is kind of the opposite of savoring. We often will dampen or spoil our good experiences while we're savoring or chewing on our mistakes. My wife used to tell this story about running up the M, and she was pretty fast, but she would oftentimes hear the voice of her mother, and it would be a negative voice. It would be like, "What are you doing? Can't you go faster? This is kind of a waste of time." And she'd hear these negative thoughts. Then she thought of her grandmother, and she decided, I'm going to replace the thoughts that are popping into my brain with my grandmother's voice. And her grandmother was likely to say things like, "Oh, sweetie, you are amazing. You are doing I can't believe how fast you're going." And then she would tell me afterwards when she compared her experiences, like when she channeled in her grandmother's voice, which was so prizing and accepting and valuing of her, that her runs up the M in Missoula went so much better. Do you ever get stuck chewing on the negative or spoiling the positives? It's another natural obstacle to happiness. And so I encourage you, if you find yourself being critical of yourself when you've had an experience that you might otherwise savor, let yourself shift the voice in your head to extend the pleasure instead of spoiling it. An easy way to do savoring is to do savoring with friends. And some people call this mutual savoring. And that might involve calling an old friend and doing a little remember when. Remember when we had that trip that we took together. Remember when we were in high school and we used to do this or that or whatever it is. Again, remembering with a friend, savoring with a friend will improve mood and hope. It will improve the likelihood of you repeating a positive experience. It will also, not surprisingly, increase your planning to do something positive again. The question I like to ask people at this point is, how will you remember to savor the positives? It's really tough. It's interesting because it's easy for us to remember to chew on the negatives. It's much less easy for us to remember to savor the positives. I encourage you to find a way to do that. I encourage you to find a way to practice three good things. Here's tool number three, gratitude. I like to say this like a salesperson. Do you want to increase optimism, improve life satisfaction, be healthier, exercise more, and be happier? Well, then, weave intentional gratitude into your life. Sounds pretty fantastic. The thing I find most interesting about that is that there's been a gratitude study that showed that people who practice gratitude exercised more than people who did not practice gratitude. That's pretty interesting, and it's hard for me to figure out, what's the link there? How and why did that happen? So let's do a little gratitude practice right now. And again, I know it might be hard. Do it if you can. Get centered and reflect. Think of one thing, one person, one experience, one event, one goal or one moment that you're thankful for. You can write it down, you can pop it into the front of your brain as we're talking right now. If you want, you can share the gratitude that you feel with someone else. You can just share it, even if it's not gratitude toward the person. But if it's gratitude toward the person that you want to share it with, find a way to do that. You could message them one way or another, right? You could also do it face to face. Handwritten notes can be really powerful. So find a way, if you want, to express gratitude to someone. Whenever I think of this, I think of an old football coach I had at a community college where I went, and I have such gratitude for him and the influence and the impact that he had on my life. So, think you can think of someone like that. I had another person who I was working with, and she said, "Well, I have gratitude for my 16-year-old self who had the courage to go on an exchange trip to, I think it was Central America." And she said, and I didn't even like Spanish, but it was a Spanish exchange, and I went there for several months, and I just turned out, I loved it. And then she turned out to be and become a Spanish teacher. And so she was interestingly having gratitude for a decision that her former self made. I think that's pretty cool. So, fourth tool, and we'll wind on down after that, but sleep well. This is a tool that no one could ever possibly argue with because we all know life is better when we're sleeping well. Someone asked somebody who was an expert in college student success, what's the most important thing for college students' success? The person said, sleep. Easy. Same thing for all of us, really. If we want success and good health, we will at least sometimes prioritize our good sleep. And why is that? Because sleep disruption is linked to accidents, illness, lower achievement, depression, irritability, worse mental health, all by itself. Insomnia is a risk factor for suicide. I mean, that's how miserable it can make us. One little anecdote about myself. I was at my community college, and I was experiencing this thing where I would lay down to take a nap. I probably wasn't sleeping as well at night as I should have been, or I was just going to bed at night, and I would have this experience where I would start to hear this static, like, and then I would see kind of a shadowy figure at the end of the couch or the end of the bed, and I'd be frozen. I would be paralyzed. And I remember thinking at that time I was really uninformed about almost anything because I was a freshman at a community college, not sleeping well, probably not studying very much. I remember thinking there were two possibilities. One was I was about to break through some kind of plane of existence and become psychic. I laugh at myself for that. The other one was I might be about to be possessed by Satan. I mean, I had those two hypotheses in my head, neither of which was very good. Or and and of course, eventually my sleep paralysis passed, And then it was in the early 2000s, I was reading the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders. I remember exactly where I was, and I came on this section. It was a section about sleep disorders, and then in particular, sleep paralysis. And I read this thing that exactly described what I was experiencing back in 1975, 76. And I thought, oh, if I'd only known. If I'd only known, I would have maybe felt better because I was not the only one and that it was a thing. People experience sleep paralysis. And oftentimes they'd hear things, and oftentimes they would see a shadowy figure at the end of their bed. So cool. Knowledge, knowledge, knowledge is power. So, to whatever extent you can, I have some advice that you might apply to your sleeping. It's important to have a routine. Sleep routine's good. Same approximate bedtime, good. Daily exercise, good. Usually not right before you go to bed. Caffeine curfew, especially if you're sensitive to caffeine. Caffeine curfew could be noon, could be 2 o'clock, maybe 3 o'clock at the latest. Shut down the caffeine. You'll sleep better. Controlling the light and the dark and the sound and the comfort, all those things can help you sleep better. Beds are for sleeping. That's what the behaviorists would say. In other words, we shouldn't be reading, we shouldn't be watching television, we shouldn't be looking at our phones. Now, I know some people read themselves to sleep, and the behaviorists are a little bit rigid about, oh no, you shouldn't do that. Well, if you're doing that and you're sleeping okay, I think it's fine. Keep on doing it. And the behaviorists also say you can use your bed for sex. They're so they're so flexible and generous. Um, Number six on the list, you can see limit your naps, your laps or your naps to less than 30 minutes. And you can also do this thing called coffee naps. That's where you have a little cup of caffeine or coffee, then you take your nap. Turns out it will enhance your alertness after the nap has completed. Avoid certain foods. People will ask me, what do you mean by certain foods? Well, I mean, certain foods that you know bother you. So we're all unique, we're different. There are certain foods that will bother you and you should learn about yourself and avoid them, especially around bedtime. A thing called the temperature decline can be really helpful. Temperature decline, like take a bath or a shower maybe 30 to 60 minutes before you go to bed so that your body temperature's going down. A hot bath, hot shower. So your body temperature's going down. That tends to help facilitate sleep onset. You want to also control and manage your screen light exposure and your tech in the bedroom. It doesn't make a huge difference for most people, but it will cut short the amount of good quality sleep you get by some number of minutes. It'll also make it a little harder to go to sleep by a certain number of minutes on average for most of us. So good to manage that. The last thing is to have a plan for dealing with troubling thoughts and dreams. And the troubling thoughts might be troubling thoughts that come up when you can't sleep, which is something that it's really important to control, like, or to manage, and to say to yourself, wait a minute, if I'm not sleeping, that's okay. Sometimes it happens. The best thing I can do is to almost sleep. And so to do some mindfulness meditation, do three good things like I described that I do some progressive muscle relaxation where you tighten your muscles and you relax your muscles. Do deep breathing, do something to get yourself close to sleep because the worst thing you can do if you're having trouble sleeping is to worry about the fact that you're having trouble sleeping because that will make it even harder for you to sleep and then it will compound the problem. So if you're not sleeping, just say to yourself, I notice I'm not sleeping, and then apply something that's calming and soothing and comforting because the research suggests that if you're not sleeping, but you're meditating or you're relaxing or you're doing something that's soothing and comfortable to you, it will be almost as good as sleeping. It's the next best thing. All right. Last thing, positive distractions. Life is hard. We all know that. You know that. Being an educator is hard. We all experience some common unhappiness and we wonder about ourselves. It's natural. It's natural for us to spoil some of our successes. Emotions are painful. Work is stressful. If you're in the teaching profession or employed in the public schools, or private schools, oftentimes you're not getting the respect you deserve. You're not getting appreciated. You're getting some hostile emails from parents and other people. There seems to be this political mentality now that devalues the teaching profession. I hope that the pendulum is going to swing back because you deserve more. You deserve more appreciation. You deserve more money. You deserve more respect. You deserve more prestige. So it's hard. Life is hard. Teaching is hard. Work is hard. Family can be hard. Emotions are difficult. Life is just a challenge. And so sometimes we just need a positive distraction to help us kind of bump out of our difficult emotional place wherever we may be. And so I will often ask people, well, what songs help you feel your feelings or boost your mood? What places can you go and oh, I like it. I like it when I go there. What cat videos or other kind of videos do you like to watch? Now you can do too much of these things, and sometimes positive distractions can become avoidance. And I'm not suggesting that. I am suggesting it's okay to distract yourself from difficult times. One of the things that works for me, I'm going to share a song I like. I'm going to sing it. No, I'm not going to sing the whole thing. But I am going to tell you, when I was in ninth grade, I was in junior high, so we were in ninth grade. I had a great basketball coach. He would play the same song before every game. We weren't that good, but it was a great song, and I remember it, and it would pump us up. Here it is. You ready? Sing along with me if you know it. Jeremiah was a bullfrog, was a good friend of mine. I'm going to stop there because I'm not a great singer, and it's always better to leave people wanting more or relieved that you stopped. Either way, I'm going to the next slide. Summary, eudaimonic happiness, it's about finding your sweet spot. Three good things: savoring, gratitude, strategies for sleeping or almost sleeping well. All those things can help you feel better in your day to day life. And that's really worthwhile. You can also use positive distractions. Think about the songs that are your go to happy songs or people who are your go to happy people. It's good to have those kinds of people who you can turn to. One last little story, and I'll stop. There's an old, former, late positive psychologist who used to tell people, you can come to my hour-long lecture on positive psychology if you would like, or if you want, I can tell you the whole thing. I can summarize it in 5 seconds. People would say, tell us, tell us. And he'd say, other people matter. Period. End of lecture. And then in later years, he added, other people matter, and we are all other people to everyone else. And this really says something important, I think, and that is part of the meaning of life and that sweet spot where you offer what you can in your relationships to other people. I think it's all about those reciprocal positive relationships, creating them, sustaining them, being with people through challenging times. And so I hope you can make time for that as well and recognize you don't always have to be happy. And there will be times when you are absolutely not. But if you can increase the control you feel over your emotional state and move it a little bit in the positive direction, that's going to pay off for you in the long run. Thank you so much for listening. I am now going to stop this recording right now. See ya.